Hey there, welcome to the Literary Escapes podcast. I'm Becky, and I'm glad you're here today. If you're a fan of books that give you an escape or let you explore other cultures, then you're definitely in the right place. So I'm glad you've joined us today. Stick around, we've got a great author interview for you, so let's jump right in. Thank you, Kathleen, for being with us tonight. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that.
So
it's always fun to talk about books.
Well, we were talking about this earlier. You are in South Korea. So this is tomorrow for you, right? Tomorrow morning.
I'm speaking to you from the future.
It goes well with the book, I think, between the time travel that took place in the book. So that works out pretty nicely. So you were telling me that you are an editor of the New York Times. How long have you been with the New York Times, and how did all that come about?
So I've been with the New York Times since 2005. So my day job is really journalist. I was, an English major, as so many people are. I loved books and reading and writing, and I didn't really have a plan for my career. And I actually started out of college, I was an English teacher in Hong Kong for 2 years. And after that, I was like, I'm not cut out to be a teacher. This is just not what I can do.
It's a whole different world.
I'm constantly editing my students' compositions. Like, that was my favorite part of being a teacher. And so I was like, well, maybe I could go to journalism school. So that was what happened. I went to journalism school in North Carolina, and I found a job at the local paper. So I sort of really fell into journalism. So I was a copy editor for many years, which is,
nice.
Basically like writing headlines, making sure everything makes sense. I was a copy editor in Raleigh. I got the opportunity I was sort of invited to come and try out at the New York Times in 2004, became a copy editor on the Metro desk, and I have been there ever since. Nice. Not on the Metro desk. I did different jobs at the Times. And as I was saying, I got this opportunity. I saw the listing for a job in Seoul at the Asia Hub. And so that was how I moved to the foreign desk, which
nice.
is international news. So here I am. Currently, I'm like the late editor, which means I'm working from early afternoon to kind of 10 o'clock at night or so. So when I get to work, New York is asleep. London is asleep, but London wakes up about 3 o'clock in our afternoon.
Okay.
And so I sort of communicate with London, and then.
So their afternoon is when New York is waking up. And,
right. It's all kind of mind-boggling. It's like
really
I send a handoff note of like things that I did, what published, what's going on. And it's like I'm writing that note at 9:30 at night so that the editors in New York can read it before their meeting at 8:30 in the morning. And it's just like I still have trouble sometimes.
Yeah, that's crazy that the whole time shifts. Like in our emails to each other, it's like I had to think hard about, okay, so if I do this time, this is her time.
Yeah, and it's often like a lag of like 24 hours because I write an email, somebody reads it in their morning. By the time they've replied, it's my morning, so it can be hard to get things done. Yeah, that's how I'm here. That's how it happened.
Interesting. Yeah. And so you're enjoying it over there, and
it's been pretty intense. I mean, obviously the news in the last little while has been really intense. I mean, really since 2016, news has just been crazy, but particularly with, over here with the war in Ukraine and everything, it's just been pretty crazy. And that was really, and I think that I actually, that was part of my inspiration when I started writing this book, the Jane Austen Project, was sort of a wish to escape from the dailiness of like the constant news, bad things happening. Like I sort of wanted something that was completely outside of my daily existence. And so I was sort of drawn to the past. And I think
That's
I like,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so what year did you write the book?
Well, it had a very long gestation process. I really got the
Most do.
idea. I got the idea. I remember distinctly, I got the idea in September of 2007, and it just came to me like in a flash of inspiration. And so I worked on the book though like 2007 to like in 2012 I had like a manuscript. I had a complete
Okay.
manuscript. I joined a writer's workshop in Brooklyn where we all read each other's manuscripts, and based on that I revised it some more.
Mm-hmm.
I started trying to find an agent sometime after that, about 2013. I finally got an agent in the beginning of 2015. um, and I worked on the book, like some other things, like he sold it almost immediately, but then I went through a revision process and I ended up losing one editor. Like we had a
Okay.
difference of views. And so at the end of 2015, I had like substantially revised the book. It sold again in 2016 and it came out in 2017. So it
Okay.
was really like 10 years from
Wow.
start to finish,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is a long time for a book that's not, I mean, like I'm very proud of this book, but it's not like War and Peace, it's not like that. It's not that complicated. It really shouldn't have been that hard, but it is hard to write a book, as I'm
It is
finding.
hard to write a book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have new respect for anyone, even like when I read like a book that I think is not very good, it's like the person actually wrote it. Like, it's like to keep everything in order and to actually see this process through is really it seems easy when you're not the one doing it.
Agreed.
So like,
Yeah. Agreed. That's interesting. So, what were some of the differences that you noticed, like from being a journalist to being an author? The styles of writing, or
the styles of writing definitely. I think so yeah, sort of. One big thing is like, my time horizon, particularly as a copy editor, because that's not the kind of editor where you work on a project over a long period of time. It's like a copy
right?
editor gets a story, turns it around, gets it in the paper. Like at most, I might have worked on what's called a heave, which is like maybe a 3,000 word story, like one of those big ones that takes up 2 inside pages in a print edition. But the lifespan of an idea is quite short.
Okay.
So whereas a book, it's like a thing that you work with over such a long period of
Yeah.
time. And actually, one of the things I think that sort of helped me do this was I got this kind of, I was asked to work on something at the paper that was like where I was editing a series of stories over like of a period of like 6 months.
Oh,
And so
cool.
I had to actually assign stories and think about like, I had to like think longer than a
The
week
moment.
ahead,
Yeah.
I think like months ahead. And I sort of changed how I think about things. So I think that, you know, writing a book is like running a marathon. Like you have to really,
Yeah.
it has to be like sustained effort and sort of have a vision, which that was different for me. And of course, the writing is very different. I think that newspaper, journalism it's really about conveying the facts as
Mm-hmm.
as swiftly as possible. Like I wouldn't say that the writing is terrible, but it's often very dense. It's like we're sort of trained. The so-called nut graph is like there's all this jargon in journalism. I'm sorry I'm using all these like
That's
things,
okay.
nut graph. But the nut graph is like the thing that this whole story can be boiled down to the essence of one paragraph. And when you
Oh,
start
wow.
to if you read a New York Times story, you'll see what I mean. There's like one paragraph where you
One,
go, okay, this has
this is
got
the
all the ideas
story.
of this
Yeah.
story, and everything else is just an
A
elaboration.
support of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a completely, and usually that's like the second or third paragraph. And so, whereas fiction is all about this sort of controlled release of information, and it's
Yeah.
you're telling it as it's like the beauty of the sentences themselves. So it's a very different sort of just approach to
Mm-hmm.
conveying information. And of course, this sort of information is but I think narrative is also there's a lot of similarities too. Like you have to keep your reader interested, and
Mm-hmm.
you know I don't
Keep
know,
keep it relevant to what you're talking
keep it
about.
relevant.
Yeah.
Give the person a reason to keep reading.
Yeah.
There's and of course there is, like, they've done all these, they can tell when you're reading something online, like what percentage of readers, not the
Right.
individual readers, but what percentage of readers actually get to the bottom of a
Mm-hmm.
1,000 word story or a 3,000 word story, and it's quite low. Most people don't read to the end, and
Yeah.
um, they which is fine. Like they get as much information as they want, and then they stop.
And
And
then
if
they
they
move
want more,
on.
they keep
Yeah.
reading. I try not to feel bad about that, but obviously with a novel, you definitely want people to read to the end because
You'd
that's
like them to, yeah.
right.
That's why you put all this work into it, and 10 years worth of thinking about this
Right,
book. You want them to read to the end. So
right.
yeah. So
But
how did Jane Austen come into your life?
I have always, I've long been a fan of Jane Austen. I think I first read Pride and Prejudice when I was probably in seventh grade. I read her other works, gradually, but I wasn't like a huge super fan. I mean, I liked her, but I wasn't obsessed. That kind of came later. And I think it was sort of there were a couple of things. Like I was reading actually something else that sort of sent me back to Jane Austen, which was there's this series of books, and actually this might be something you should consider for your book club because it's definitely travel. Um, Maybe you're familiar with Patrick O'Brien, and the first book is called Master and Commander, and there's a series of books about a Napoleonic. It's the Napoleonic Wars. It's the British Navy. So it's this captain
Okay.
and his friend, uh, who's a doctor, and they have a series of adventures at sea. But it's really, the thing about it is it's set in the period of Jane Austen. This is when she lived during the Napoleonic Wars. And her brothers were actually, two of her
In the
brothers were
war,
actually
yeah.
sea captains. But the way that Patrick O'Brien writes, it's very much like Jane Austen, like sort of in the humor and in the relationships. It's really about the relationships of people, even though they have all these sea battles and they have all these adventures, but it's really about the sort of the friendship between these two men and sort of the stuff that happens to them. And for some reason, and you feel like you're in the past. Like when you read these books, it's like, sometimes when you read historical fiction, you can sort of see the preoccupations of the present. Like people will do things that are, seem very socially relevant today. Like
Yeah.
the characters are very, very concerned about like women's rights or slavery or, just in a sort of anachronistic way. Whereas in Patrick O'Brien, you don't feel that at all. Like Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell books are like that too. Like you really
Okay.
feel, you don't feel the past like looking through. So it was like I was reading these books and I was like, these are amazing. It's like he was a time travel. It's like he went back and he saw what he reported, and I was like, what? Maybe he really is a time traveler. Like this guy, the way he writes. So for some reason, I was like time travel
This
and Jane
idea,
Austen
yeah.
were sort of merging in my head. I think at that age, I was the age that Jane Austen was when she died. And I started thinking about all that Jane Austen had done before she died at 41. And I was like, I don't know. It was all like this kind of mix in my head. But one night I was lying awake thinking like, what if Jane Austen had been a man, like she probably would have gone to sea like her brothers, and maybe she would have written books like this. But she wasn't, and it was like, what was Jane Austen really like anyway? I had never really concerned myself with this question. Like I
Yeah.
didn't want to know. I just liked the books. I wasn't interested in her biography. But for some reason, I found myself thinking about this and really, really, like really wondering, like, I wish I knew. I wish I could know. I wish I could travel back in time and find this out. And and for some reason that was like, but I can't. but I can write this book and it can be so real that it will be like I did, and other people will get to experience this too. So it was really like this sort of, sudden vision, and it was, I was just ready to spend, like 10 years devoting myself to this vision,
Yeah.
which I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew that I needed to do a lot of research. I really wanted to know exactly, what was going on historically and what it was like to be alive in that time.
Okay.
And Jane Austen doesn't really give you that. She doesn't really give you the details. She just assumes that you know them.
Exactly. Because she wasn't writing for us.
No.
She was
And
writing for
what's
her people. Yeah.
yeah, and yet she does write for us because, if you compare her to like other people, a lot of books at that time, they get bogged down in things about what people are wearing, or the social customs that don't really make sense. And somehow, even though there's a lot of stuff in Jane Austen, like the more that you learn about how people did things, like there's all these little clues in her stories, like what time people eat dinner, for example, is
Right.
a very important social cue. But she doesn't belabor that. It's like, but there'll be a passing mention of like when people eat dinner, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay, like this person is fashionable or this person is not. So yeah,
That's
that's just
interesting.
one. Yeah, or like what kind of carriages people drive.
Yes. Yes.
People have written whole papers about this, a gig versus a curricle versus a barouche.
Exactly.
But it would be like in our, somebody was driving a Mercedes versus a Mini Cooper. Like that would say something about their character.
Right.
And we assume this reading fiction, but somebody 200 years in the future is not going to understand the difference between the Mercedes driving character and the Mini Cooper driving character. But so her current, contemporary readers had all these clues that we don't have. But the thing is, her books still work anyway. That's
Yeah.
what's amazing about
They
them.
do. Yeah. I enjoy them too. So that's fun. So when you wrote it, how did they figure out what genre to put it in? Because you've got the time travel fantasy piece going on. You've got the kind of dystopian after, what was it called? The die off. So you've kind of got that piece in there, but yet it feels like a historical fiction. So
Mm,
how did you, how did they
yeah,
probably?
that was a challenge. And that was a challenge. I mean, I didn't really worry so much about that when I was writing it. I was just more like, this
Yeah,
is the book I want to write, and I'll figure out, the marketing angle later. But I did, you have to write, as I'm sure you know, like, when you try to get an agent, you have to sort of write a letter describing your
right.
book and say that suggests some other books that it's similar to. Um, so, some of, like, I remember, in fact, this is how I got my agent. I was looking for sort of books that did something similar, that sort of
Okay.
transcended genre in this way. So I was really sort of, even though I was at that time, I was trying to only read books relevant to Jane Austen or the period, but I was also trying to sort of like, what's a book? So that there was a book that came out in 2013 called The Golem
Excuse
and the
me.
Genie. Oh, bless you.
I've heard of
The,
that one.
the,
Yeah.
oh, it's a wonderful book, but it's really about, there's a golem that comes to New York from Eastern Europe, from Poland, and is so it's there's fantasy, but it's also really a story about immigrants. Like the golem comes to New York, the genie is accidentally freed from his bottle in Lower Manhattan. So there are these two immigrants. It's like 1900 New York. So there's really
So
this
that's the historical
elements
piece.
of like this
Yeah.
really like historical fiction about immigrants, but they're also this magical, elements of like folklore, like, Yiddish sort of Jewish folklore, Arabic folklore. So, that was like, that's, and that's the sort of thing. So that was actually, I wrote to the Golem and the Genie's agent, and he ended up
Okay.
eventually becoming my agent because I sort of pitched this as like, here's,
Similar-ish. Yeah.
historical fiction meets science fiction meets Jane Austen.
How interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't really realize when I started this how much Jane Austen fan fiction is out there. I think if I had known, I would have been a little discouraged, because it really ended up being sort of classified as Jane Austen, not strictly fan fiction. I mean, I guess fan fiction is a very expansive term, but that was really like Jane Austen became the sort of hook, I think,
Right. Right.
more than the other things. And I hadn't really thought about what that would mean.
There's
But
a
that was sort of how
huge Jane
it's
Austen fan
enormous.
base.
It's
Yeah.
just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, it's like people, it's a sort of like instant name recognition for
Yeah.
your book.
Yeah.
But on
And
the other
there's
hand, yeah, sorry.
that, no, I was just going to say there's a lot of retellings and, that kind of thing. And a lot of, I mean, my son read one of the, what was it, the Pride, Prejudice, and Sea Monsters or something like that. So, I mean, there's all kinds
Right.
of stuff out there. Yeah.
All
So,
kinds of stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's really crazy. It's just she just continues to inspire people in so many different ways, which
Yeah.
is
And the
good.
fact that people can continually recreate basically her storylines and make them fresh is also really interesting. So,
Yes.
the tagline that's on your website, and it might be on the book, I can't remember, is what would you give up so she could live? And I didn't notice that before I read the book. But when I was going back through doing research this week, I'm like, that is so interesting because when you first get into the book, what you give up, you're thinking it's, you're giving up the creature comforts of, they are giving up the creature comforts of, the future, the modern day for them, and going back to, the the 1800s, and the doctor is giving up her identity basically. You think about all that stuff, and then when you get to the end of the story, it's like all this other stuff that, so
Right.
how, I loved thinking about all that, and was curious kind of how that piece came to be.
How that tag, that was actually my idea. And the people at HarperCollins, I guess, were okay with that. Like they didn't have another idea. So I had actually, it's funny, originally, because I think it's important to have like I think when you're writing a novel, it's important to have like a title and a sort of thing like that, whatever you
Yeah,
would call,
your
like a
tagline or whatever.
sort of a
Yeah.
flag or one, to sort of give you like a sense of where you're going.
Yeah, kind of
Um,
your guiding light
your
almost, or
your your
something.
North Star. I mean, I know
Yeah.
people who write books and they change the titles or they have no title, but for me, it's like it was very important. I mean, the title came to me at the same time as the idea, and
Oh,
I never
nice.
changed the title. Um, I actually had another tagline for a long time, which was it was very aspirational, and it probably makes sense not to anyone but me, but that was what I had. So, and this will tell you about like where I was. So my original tagline was, its possession meets eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but that was the possession is another book that inspired me in this writing, which is an amazing book that everyone should read if you haven't read already.
It's
Are you
called
are you familiar with it?
Possession. Mm-mm.
Possession by A.S. Byatt. So this was
Okay.
won the Booker Prize like back in like 1990, I think. It's the story of these two English professors who go on a sort of literary treasure hunt in they're both like specialists in 19th century British literature in two different poets. The guy is like this student of this sort of big poet from the 19th century who's sort of like, I think, inspired like something like Tennyson, like the big
Yeah.
poet. And the woman is like a professor of this female poet who is less well known but was very something like Christine Rossetti, like, just kind of writing about these folklore. Oh yeah. It starts in the present, or what was now it's historical fiction, but it was like the late 80s.
Okay.
They're in kind of academic environment, and he discovers a letter in a book, that, like, in a book in the library, one of these old books that nobody's checked out, and he realizes it's too, like, it realized there's something about this poet that nobody knew. So he's like, this is big. This could make my career. He steals the letter. It eventually leads him to this female poet, and to the female poet, the scholar of the female poet. So they go on this literary treasure hunt. But there's also this parallel storyline of the poets, taking place in the 19th century. So it's an amazing book. It's just so,
that sounds
like,
fascinating. Yeah.
Like poetry of the. So I'm sorry, I'm going on and on about this
That's
book,
okay.
but it is wonderful. So that was one of my inspirations. It is just an amazing work. And Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a movie about two people who have their memory erased because they don't want to remember their unhappy love affair. And it's also a movie that I loved. I was very interested in this idea that you could erase your memory. And that was something that was present in the idea of this book all along.
Okay.
Was that somehow they would or might, the idea that they would go back to their present and have it be different was something that was always part of my plan. That they would save Jane Austen. I'm sorry if I'm giving lots of spoilers and somebody hasn't.
No, that's okay. We've all read it. Yeah.
Okay. That they would save her, but they would pay a very heavy price.
Right.
And I didn't really initially know what the price was, but I knew it had to do something with memory. And so that was where Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Possession were my two sort of. So that was like my goofy original tagline. And that was only, I don't think I've ever told this to anyone until today. So not that it's a very interesting secret, but it is a secret. I think that when you start a book, you don't really know where it's going, but you have to have some notion. And that's one of the things that's so hard about writing fiction, is like you're creating something that wasn't there.
You're creating something from nothing. Yeah.
Right. And it looks inevitable in the end, but actually there were so many choices along the way that you almost even forget about.
Well, and even all the revisions, it probably became a new entity each time. Yeah.
It absolutely did. Especially the ending. The ending was very hard to write. I knew where I was going. I just didn't know how to get there. And I had different ideas. Like I had actually planned to kill Liam at one point. That would be the sacrifice, a life for life. But then it was like, no, this is a book, like, this is Jane Austen. Like, I can't, like,
can't do that.
I can't do tragedy. Like, that's, and then I was like, no, well, he's going to actually end up with his, they're going to go back and he's going to be married with a kid in his new future. And Rachel's going to be like, okay. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting off the track.
It's funny all the different twists that you can do, though, to mess with
so many
characters and people.
Yeah. There's so many ways that things can go, and it's like, what is the best way? So that has been, you read a book and you just sort of think, oh, it had to happen this way, but it didn't.
Didn't have to, yeah.
And I read novels differently now. Like, I'm sort of, sometimes I'll read a novel and I'll be like, this is really interesting, but I think they wrote it too fast. Like, it's not quite baked. Like, if they had thought through the implications of this a little more. I don't have a specific example, and if I did, I wouldn't say it. But sometimes you read it and you're like, oh, well, great idea, like execution, not great.
We've wondered, like, I wonder if the editors made them cut out parts of this, because it seems like this should have been longer, it should have been more expansive here, something like that with books. And that's just from, having talked about so many books over the past year and a half.
Yeah.
And it's made me a better reader, a different reader for sure. And
I often wonder that myself. Where what went wrong. And, maybe nothing went wrong. Maybe they just had like, I mean, that was the thing with my first editor, was we had a difference of vision about, she wanted like a happier ending than I was willing to provide. And I kept sort of offering these compromises, and it was like, no. So
I kept thinking
yeah.
one of them would stay in the past.
Hmm.
And then it's like, oh, they both went back. Okay. And then Liam's, married to someone else, like, wait. It was really, I mean, it kept you reading until the very end just to see what was going to happen, which I thought was, I mean, it was super interesting. So how did you get like the research piece of the time frame? I mean, there's tons of stuff out there, and you've got Jane Austen's house and the Jane Austen Center. Was any of that part of all of it?
Yeah. So definitely research was a huge part. And a lot of the reason that I took so long to write this book was really, for the first couple of years, I was just reading books like crazy.
Yeah.
And obviously I was in New York. I could not go to England. I did finally go to England. I went to England about 2 years into, you know, my research. And at that point I was very interested in how things looked,
Yeah.
which it's hard to get from reading books. But first I really started to I mean, I wanted to read, first of all, I reread all of Jane Austen. I started reading biographies of Jane Austen.
Okay.
I went to college in New York, so I had like borrowing privileges from my college. So there was like an academic library. So I literally read the entire shelf on Jane Austen.
Wow.
Like I would go up to Barnard, where I was, I would just come home with like an entire bag of books, and I mean I would read them. So it's
Just
like,
swap them
things
out the next time. Yeah.
so just, but also like, historical books about the period. It was very, like, even though it's a very relatively compressed time period, like the Regency,
Hmm.
you have to sort of consider, the French Revolution and what was going on with the economy and money. Like, I was very interested in questions like that. And
Yeah.
also just things about daily life and like servants. So also I read a lot of books, at the New York Public Library was amazing. There's like the reading room, so you can go and get these books that don't circulate, that are sort of
Yeah.
obscure. So I kind of like, when I got one book that had a really good bibliography, I would just write down all those books and then go and try to find them. So things about houses and servants and, you know, food, so all those sort of things. I was clothing was another big one, which is hard to like. That was more, I think I also did a lot of online research. There are people that are fascinated by Regency underwear
Hmm.
and just have like websites about it. So
Yeah.
and then I went to England. I went to the Jane Austen house. I went to Winchester where she died, because I had been thinking at that point that I would set something in Winchester. I did have a whole
Okay.
section in Winchester at one point. That's a really lovely place if
Okay.
you
I've
haven't.
never been to that one. Yeah.
It's a beautiful town. It's like there's a cathedral, because it was like a very important town at one point in English history. There's this wonderful cathedral, and like there's this river that sort of runs through the town. It's
Pretty.
really charming. It's not far away at all. It's a very easy train ride from London. I also went to Bath because I was
Yeah.
thinking I might set something there, but I ended up not doing
Okay.
that. Um, Also, I was interested in like house museums. So like,
Hmm.
what did what did Rachel and Liam's house look like in London that they rented? That was like a problem that tormented
Right.
me for years. Like, what would be in this house? What would it look like? What kind of place? Like, what did the street look like? And I went to some house museums, although actually the one that really is like the later I went to Dublin, and there's like a house museum there, like it's called the
Okay.
Georgian House, I think. And that was actually the best one in terms of like the size of the house and sort of the layout of the house.
Okay.
It was like some wine merchant's house in like 18, you know, but yeah, so the combination of
Gave you a good idea of what
like
yours
I
might
could
look like.
picture them
Yeah.
in that space. Like the kitchen was, you know, down in the bottom of the house, and there's like what's called an area, which is like the when you have a sort of like there's the front steps in, but then there's steps down from the sidewalk,
Yeah.
sort of, and it goes in. That's apparently called an area, and that's where like the coal would arrive, or
Right. The
the
servant deliveries or
the
whatever.
servants would, yeah,
Yeah.
the food deliveries, and just
Huh.
the public areas would be like the ground floor, and the first floor would be like the dining and the sort of entertaining, and then you'd go up and there would be the bedrooms, and then there'd be the
Right.
servant. So just all this sort of thing was very
In
important
the
to be able to,
proper order of, yeah.
right, to see it in my mind and to imagine sort of the furniture and to see them in space. So I remember at one point I wrote a chapter where it's just like they go to see this house, and I described the entire house. Like they're like touring the house, and people were like, "This is really boring." Like my writing group was like, "This is like, I know you did a lot of research, but this is really boring." And yeah, you're right, it is. It was like, okay, so which
But I'm really
detail?
proud of all this information I have. Yeah. That's so funny.
So
It's
so
funny. I
yeah,
mean, we've talked to authors before who same thing where they have just this wealth of information and like this much makes it in the book. But they
it's so
know all this stuff that was
right,
relevant to be able to put that much
right,
in and have it be
right.
accurate.
Because it's, yeah, and it's like it's not until you have all that stuff that you know what the one telling detail is.
Exactly.
And that is actually a little bit like journalism. Like, it's like reporters do all this reporting, and then like, it's like an iceberg, just this tiny bit is above the surface, but they know like,
They know
tremendous
all
amount
this
of,
stuff and yeah.
you ask them a question and they can like go on about it, but it's like you know, how to choose the right thing is like the thing that's so crucial.
Yeah. That's that. Yeah. That's very true. So, have you ever participated in like any of those Jane Austen character type things where you dress up and because I've always thought that would be fascinating and
Um, not Not exactly. I did one of the other things I did when I started this was I joined my local Jane Austen Society chapter in New York, and they typically have like lectures.
mhm.
People come and talk about things. They always have a party for Jane Austen's birthday in December. Um, and there was one, I remember somebody was a costume person, and she came with all these clothes, and she talked about costumes, and I actually joined, like, so I forget exactly, this was a long time ago, this was at the very early stages, but I remember I was like, you could sign up or raise your hand and go into the room and like either be the maid or be the person and dress
Okay.
or help somebody dress up. So I was actually a servant because I thought that would be more interesting. I didn't really feel like dressing up, but I wanted to see the underwear. So, but yeah, people. So, and if you go to like the Jane Austen, they also have an annual convention of all the Jane
Right.
Austen. It's like a big deal. It's like 3 or 4 days somewhere. So they had
Yeah.
it in New York. I remember in 2012. It
Oh,
was actually
okay.
on the in Brooklyn, and I went, and there was a lot of costuming. So personally, I never got into the dress up. I was, but I admire that. I admire people that do that. I'm personally not handy. Like I can't sew. And you really need to be able to like,
Yeah.
you know, do that. But
It's
I,
not
I
like
do
you can
have
run down
friends,
to Target and grab it or anything. So yeah.
right? But yeah, it's so I've never actually worn, the corset, but I have studied the corset and the
Yeah.
outfit.
Seems like that would
Um,
be extremely uncomfortable.
they get a bad rap, corsets, but really,
Yeah.
especially the ones, the Georgian era, were not so confining. It was more like a, you know, like it didn't, the tiny waists had not come into fashion.
Oh,
So
okay.
The Regency gowns were actually kind of forgiving because it's like you have you know, there's no waist really. It's like empire waist. So it's just
Oh, yeah, because it just kind of falls down,
right.
right
But
under
it
the.
does, I mean, the ideal figure for that sort of thing is, basically quite flat chested and skinny. So that's, it's not a look for everyone.
Right. Right. We had, I guess it was February of last year, we read Pride and Prejudice, and then we read one of the retellings of it. But there's a lady up in Vermont somewhere that has a house that does Jane Austen weekends. And they'll discuss different books, and then they have like a character weekend where
I think
everybody comes in.
yeah, I think I've
Yeah.
heard of this lady. Yeah.
And they do, the bow and arrow and whatever other, things happened at that point in time. But I always thought that would be so fascinating
Yeah.
to, I don't know if I want to
Yeah.
dress up in that because I'm not a big dress person, but it just seems like it would
And
be fascinating.
it would be fascinating. I think when you're actually in the costume, you feel different.
I would
Yeah,
think
and also
so.
the conventions have like I remember doing a one about like learning about ink and writing and how the
Ooh,
physical action of writing was actually accomplished. And this is another area where I probably have two sentences about it, but it was like months of research.
I bet. Yeah.
Paper, ink, pens. When were they still using quill? She's often pictured with like the feathery quill,
Right.
which apparently people were using quills, but they weren't necessarily all feathered. It was
Coffee
more
and
just
yeah.
um and how to like temper the feather. It wasn't just like you use a feather, you have to like harden it with heat so that it becomes like more
It
more
doesn't splay
sturdy
probably. And yeah,
and split the nib slightly so it can absorb the ink. So there's this whole science of how this is done. So yeah, just so many things like that.
that's so interesting. Yeah, crazy. So with all this research of both Jane Austen, the time frame, all of that, do you feel like you got a really good sense of who she was and that you were able to put that in your book?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a whole other area of study, right? It's not just the time frame, but what
Yeah.
was she really like? Yes. And I mean that was um I mean I think everybody has their own idea of what Jane Austen was like, but
Yeah.
that was definitely something, I mean that was really one of the primary sources of my inspiration is like who was this woman? Why? How did she, her life seems so ordinary. How did she end up the way she was?
Yeah.
This person whose work we're still reading and finding new things in, more than 200 years later. Um, yes, I have a definite sense of Jane Austen as a person, but I also feel like she is hard to get to know. And I tried to sort of address that in the action of the novel. I mean,
Yeah.
Rachel comes, she comes closer to her, but it's not like they immediately become like buddy
No, they
buddy.
don't. Yeah. Did you
Which I
take
think,
some liberties in there?
well, I think
You probably had to, but
I, I don't think I did not say anything that was knowingly inaccurate. But the thing
okay.
is, there's so much that we don't know that
Right.
you inevitably have to fill it with, imaginary things. So
Okay.
um, one of the things, and I think I probably talk about this in the book, is one of the things that's interesting about Jane Austen is that she wasn't famous when she was alive. I
Right.
mean, her novels did okay. Like people actually liked them, but it wasn't, she had no, I mean, of course, she was not publicly known as the author. I mean, she'd never put her name on the books. People sort of knew, insiderly, people knew,
Yeah.
the Prince Regent knew, and, her brothers, it was supposed to be a secret, but her brothers actually sort of like at one point, there's this story about how Charles, her youngest brother, who was one of the sea captains, was like on a ship somewhere, and somebody was talking about this amazing book that he read and how great it was, and he was like, that's my sister.
That's
Like
my
she read.
sister.
So people knew, but it wasn't like
Okay.
publicly known. But nobody wrote about, there was nothing like public about her, and she didn't meet other authors. She didn't participate in the literary world. She
Right.
probably could have a little bit if she wanted to. Like Henry did know people. There was some point where she could have met Madame de Stael, and she was like, no. So she didn't want to be like, and she died really so relatively young that it was like, if she had lived longer, maybe she would have changed her mind about that. She would have wanted to
Yeah.
meet other writers, but so there was no contemporary sort of information about her outside of her own family.
Right.
And Henry wrote a biographical notice when Persuasion came out after her death.
Okay.
It
Right.
came out in 1818. She had died in July of 1817, and that was the first time that her name was mentioned. And he wrote this very like, oh, she was wonderful, she was kind, she was smart. It's just this like 2-paragraph thing about how amazing
Yeah.
she was, no details. So all the biographical details came from basically the letters, the
Right.
surviving letters, which the letters to Cassandra, which
Hmm.
Cassandra lived to be like 70 something. She died
Wow.
in, I think, 1840 something.
That's
And
pretty impressive.
yeah, and she kept these letters the whole time, but she burnt a lot of them before she died, and she gave some of them to some nieces and nephews. So these nieces and nephews are really the primary source of information that we have. So the last sibling died in like 1861, I think.
Okay.
That was Frank, the other sea captain. He lived to be 90 something. At this
Wow.
point, it's like a little bit after that. This is about the time that the Brontes are becoming famous. Well,
Yeah.
Charlotte becomes this huge literary celebrity, and it's like, oh, this amazing female writer. And so actually the Austens, the young Austens, are like, we have this amazing aunt, and she wrote these great books, and so they
Yeah.
decided to write a biography of her. Like, really, it was like 3 of them that sort of the one of the sons of her oldest brother and 2 of the nieces. So they sat down and sort of put together like what they remembered about their aunt, and like, so these old family stories. So basically, and it's the Victorian era, so all the sort of snarkiness that you see in the letters has been toned down. She's this amazing, paragon. And so that was sort of how Jane Austen biography began, and it's been this sort of process of like trying to unearth from
The
other sources.
real, yeah.
So it's a fascinating sort of weird thing that happened to her biographically. And during this time, she's sort of becoming more. She has fans, like people. She's never really been out of print, and her profile is sort of growing in the end of the 19th century. But it isn't until long after that
Yeah.
people really be
So
interested in
interesting.
her as a
Yeah.
person. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, this sort of Victorian. I mean, one of the things about Jane Austen is like she was born in this kind of raucous, it's like a much more, frank sort of, raunchy sort of world of people are more open about, illegitimate children, and, all these
Right.
sort of things. And then the Victorians sort of put a lid on all this, and this idea that women are very proper, and all this sort of is more from that time. There's like
Right.
people are becoming more socially conservative. So she's, and the nephews are
And
trying to fit her into this box of like the angel in the house.
right, right.
So that's super, super interesting to me. I'm sorry if
Yeah.
I'm kind of going
That's
on about,
no,
but
that's
it is.
fun. It's super interesting hearing those kind of details. So, do you have another book in you, do you think?
I'm trying. It's been a long process.
Yeah.
I mean, and moving to Seoul has been a little distracting. Um, but I am trying to write another book. And I
Nice.
hope that I can do so. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. That's exciting. And I hope it goes well, because
Yeah.
it's a big job, obviously, you know that. So yeah,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
fun. So
Um,
what are you reading right now?
right now, I'm always reading like a bunch of different things. Um, and I just finished a book that I really enjoyed, um, like a contemporary novel called Fellowship Point,
Okay.
which is about it's about two women in their 80s and have been like lifelong friends, and they're like sort of from this wealthy Philadelphia world, and they summer, as a verb, they summer in Maine. They have like there's these cottages that were like sort of set up by their ancestors in the 19th
Uh-huh.
century. And so it's all about like, really it's about the friendship of these two women, but it's also about Maine and sort of
Fun.
the outsiders. That's I'm very bad at talking about books I read. I read Sea of Tranquility by St. John Emily Mandel Emily St. John Mandel,
Okay.
who's the author of Station 11. That was the book that sort of put her on the map.
Nice.
Um, Sea of Tranquility is about some of the things that I've been interested in. Like, so my novel that I'm trying to write now involves, not to give too much away, but it involves like it involves sort of time travel, but also the idea that we might be like living in a computer simulation. And it also involves the Brontes. Um,
How interesting. Okay.
um, Sea of Tranquility deals with some of these similar themes. Like there's this time traveler, and there's like uh, something an anomaly. So there's
Uh-huh.
something sort of this rip in the fabric of reality, and so but the way that she tells the story is extremely interesting. It reminded me a little bit of Cloud Atlas, which is another book that I
Yeah.
really liked, um, in the structure of sort of you start with these seemingly disparate characters, and then you see how they fit together.
Yeah. You know, it'd be interesting, not to give you another book or anything, but in the Jane Austen Project, you talk about the die-off, and you talk about this organization that does the time travel, and that whole thing of what the die-off was, and this organization, and some of the other time travel that they've done, and that would be super
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and that is sort of a theme that is part of it. Yeah, because I'm also interested in that. Like obviously you can't do research about that part. It's like it all has to come from your head. So in a
Yeah,
way that it can be whatever you want, but that's also quite daunting because
right.
again,
Because
like
there's no research for it. Yeah,
you can only sort of look for inspiration in the world around you, I guess, or in
yeah.
other books.
It's
So
funny,
yeah,
the idea, you know, you had mentioned, the idea that there could be time travelers, and when you look around, you see people that look a little out of place, and give them that side eye, like, hmm.
yeah, yeah. Like maybe they're among us, right? I
Yeah,
mean, if time travel has been invented, like which obviously in the known laws of physics is impossible for many reasons, but it's also true that we don't actually, there's a lot we don't know about the
there's a
world.
lot we don't know. Yeah.
So it could be that we are living in a computer simulation in a very detailed representation of reality that we think is reality. And actually that, like, once you sort of accept that idea, it becomes very interesting because it's almost like the creator of your I mean, that is like an argument for the existence of God, right? And in fact, maybe, you know, we are like, what does it mean to live in a simulation? If it's completely like reality, where does reality end and the simulation begin? And the creator of the simulation, who is this mighty being? So it's almost like the best argument for the existence of God. If you're like an atheist, it gives you pause, right? It's like how did things end up? Like, another thing that I like to read, that I have sort of been reading over the years, are these sort of, I'm very interested in, notions about physics and time travel and the nature of the universe. And so I was actually reading a book about, some of it was very boring, but some of it was very interesting, called Reality Plus, which explores this idea of, if we were living in a simulation, how would we know? And what would it look like? Is this
would
possible?
it matter?
Would it matter? Well, that's exactly, because ultimately
it's our reality.
Live in the world, right? It's real enough. So yeah, these are the kind of questions that I'm very interested in.
Well, it'll be fun to see what you come up with for this next book, with all of that going around in your mind. That'll be fun. That'll be fun to hear. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I really, it's very good to think about all these things. So
yeah, it's fun to hear your thought process behind the project and how you what you were thinking of as you created these characters and the situations and all of that. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Becky.
Yeah, enjoyed it. And when the next one comes out, I'd love to hear.
You'll be hearing from me.
I love it. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining me today on the Literary Escape podcast. If you enjoy hearing the behind the book story, then join me in the Literary Escape Society. We're a community of travelers who love books, or maybe book lovers who love to travel. Either way, if you need an escape, a literary escape, come join us as we read our way around the world together, one book at a time. Check out the show notes to learn more about the Literary Escape Society. And we'll see you next time on the next episode.